tuned into Bethel, bhgtv. Another Bethel House of God ministry.
This song goes out to the people in the world. They need to hear this song right here. Cause if they don't heed to this warning, I'll hate to be them on Judgment Day. Look at all this evil crime, world is on a decline. The world is about to catch this heat, cause destruction's about to repeat. Instead of living all their lives, people going crazy online. Great posts. They got no love but hate. All they wanna do is spread slander all day. So look around the world, many dying every day. Yeah, they knew the way to live, but they didn't live that way. No excuses. And they died all in their sins, without a sacrifice. So won't you send this warning out to the people still alive? Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. To the souls. If they don't read, won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. To the souls. If they don't repent. The church. Everybody doing what they wanna do. They don't really care, they don't want the truth. They just wanna play religion like the fool. So divided they can't tell you what they gonna do. Engineers, man, they don't endure the truth. Engineers, they don't got a clue. Paganism, man, it gotta go before the Christ comes. And you hear these words, depart from me, I never knew you. You who break God's law, no excuses. And you die all in your sins, without a sacrifice. So won't you send this warning out to the people still alive? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. To the souls. If they don't read, won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. To the souls. If they don't read. Hope y'all listening. Yeah, this is life or death. This world is gonna burn in the fire. Yeah, nowhere for you to run in the fire. Yeah, but if you just repent before the Father, believe in Christ who'll save you from the lake of fire. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. To the souls. If they don't read, won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. To the souls. If they don't read, won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. If they don't read, won't you tell them? Tell them whoa. To the souls. If they don't read, tell them whoa. Won't you tell them? Tell them whoa.
Thank you for tuning into Bethel, bhgtv. Like, share, and subscribe. Now our host, Pastor Johnson. Thank you for tuning into Bethel, bhgtv. Like, share, and subscribe. Now our host,
Thank you for
Pastor.
being here. Thank you for tuning in. Tonight, we have a special report. We want to say just hello to all of you all that's in our chat room over there. Let me just do that real quick because I always like to say hello to all of you all that's in our chat room. Before we get to our special report tonight, we do have a special report coming your way, and you're going to enjoy this tonight. But before we do that, you know how we always like to do it. We want to say hello to Brother Abraham Talbert, our first in our chat room tonight. He and Sister Marie, Yason, and Sister Veronica N. Those are our first 4 in here tonight. Lester, how you doing? Thank you for coming in tonight for our special. Sister Stephanie, thank you for coming in tonight. Sister Donna, thank you for coming in. Alva, thank you for coming in. Sister Linda Jones Vicker, thank you for coming in. And there is Sister Susan H. We haven't seen her in a while. Thank you for coming in. There is Sister Renee, thank you for coming in. Now tonight, the report, brothers and sisters, the report. Let's get back to the report. This is a special report, and it's the search for the people of the book. And you will enjoy it tonight. Shout out to Sister Tara coming in from Atlanta. How you doing, Sister Tara? All the way from the ATL. Tonight you're going to enjoy this report. It's going to be coming from one of our brothers, Brother Benaiah Israel. Brother Israel and I have done a couple of conferences together, and I want you all to know that he is really putting it together on this one. Shout out to Kaleem Hill. Yes, I did. I did enjoy the IOG music today. Brother Kaleem is coming from our Facebook side. Thank you for being here, Brother Kaleem. Hidden Hebrews, Part 3. That's what this is going to be on tonight on our special report. I'm going to get out of the way. Now, in this special report, we got 2 specials coming tonight. After the first one, Hidden Hebrews 3, this is the 3rd week that we have been bringing these to you as we have promised that we would do. We would bring these to you for 3 weeks in a row. So we're here tonight bringing these to you. And let me just say this, you will enjoy this. After this one, you're going to hear, we're going to hear from Minister Michael Norman, who we're going to play a song in between the first 2 parts of these. And I'll be here around, sitting there on my TV watching this along with you. I'll be in and out of the chat room. So to all of you all, thank you for coming in. Thank you for being a part of this tonight. Here is this report. One of the things in Black History Month, we want people to know who are the people of the book. And a lot of times, these are good programs to invite your family members to, or at least share this video with. Now, this is our 3rd special report. You can go back. All of them are titled Special Report with a subheading on them after that. But this is to let people know that although we have biblical information, and that's a lot, that's enough in and of itself, but it's always good to have some academic information to follow through. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight, following through with that. And you will enjoy yourselves tonight. Get your popcorn, sit around, come around, and be a part of this, brothers and sisters, because no doubt you will enjoy yourselves tonight. And that's what I'm going to do. It's always good. My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And this information is not information about race. It's not about color. It's about biblical history. That's what it's about. So this is not a race thing. It's not a color thing. Although the next lesson after this one, it gets into the color. But that's Bible history. And that's what this is about. It's about Bible history, the special report, the search for the people of the book. Enjoy this tonight, and I'll be right here with you. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in. right here at Bethel BHG TV. Here, brothers and sisters, is Brother Benaiah Israel.
In this sign you shall conquer.
And this was the supposed vision of the Roman Emperor Constantine, also called Pontifex Maximus, which means high priest of the Christian church. And now let's pick up where we left off. And it reads, after mature deliberation of the affair, he commanded that all the Jews and Moors in Portugal who would not profess the Christian religion to depart the kingdom, and set them a day, after which, if any of them were found there, they should forfeit their liberty. The Moors immediately passed over into Africa, and as the Jews were preparing to depart, the king commanded that all their children who were not above 14 years old, that they should be taken from their parents and educated in the Christian religion. It was a most affecting thing to see children snatched from the embraces of their mothers and fathers embracing their children, violently torn from them, and even beat with clubs. To hear the dreadful cries they made, every place filled with the lamentations and yells of women. Many through indignation threw their sons into pits, and others killed them with their own hands. What added to their misery was that those who would have gone over to Africa to avoid these evils were not suffered, for the king deferred giving them liberty of sailing day after day. And although at first he assigned them 3 ports where they might go on board, he afterwards forbid them their sailing from any other but that of Lisbon. This brought a vast number of Jews to that city. But in the meanwhile, the appointed day was past, so that such of them as could not get off were necessarily made slaves. Most of them, being overcome with these calamities, chose rather, either sincerely or fiendly, to make profession to Christianity. Now, some of the rebellious house of Judah accepted Christianity in order to save their lives, their children, and their property. However, many didn't fully accept the religion headed by the Pope, headed by the one who calls himself the replacement of Christ, whose name equals 666, which is the number of Satan. Now, just so that we don't forget the physical description of these Jews, let's review the following references. The following reference speaks to the color of the Jews, and it reads, "And from these banished Jews, the black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luanga." The next reference reads, "'Tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews, who marrying always among one another, beget children like themselves." And lastly, the following reference reads, "Are Jews white like you?" "No," replied I, "rather more like yourself, very dark." Now these black, brown, swarthy, dark-skinned Jews chose secretly to practice their religion, as the following reference reads, and it reads, "But as these Jews did not profess the Catholic faith truly and heartily, but feigned and externally, they remained as much Jews as they were before, and so much the more dangerous, because concealed." Now let's take a closer look at the Inquisition to see how it affected the parents of the rebellious house of Judah, who were left behind in Europe. A long, long time ago, when the power of the Pope reigned supreme, the one who calls himself the replacement of Christ saw the religion of the rebellious house of Judah spreading throughout his dominion. And in order to put a stop to these commandment keepers, he created the Inquisition. And the following quote reads, "King Emmanuel was succeeded by John III in 1521, who, observing that Judaism spread greatly in his time, that the Jews publicly professed their errors and taught them others, that his domestic servants, not only such as proceeded from them, but those who were ancient Christians, were infected with the poison of their doctrine, condemned the sacraments of the church, did not receive them in the article of death, treated with great irreverence holy images, and especially some of the Virgin Mother of God, the Lady of Angels." They are the words of Sosa. Considering these things in his mind, he desired of Pope Clement VII, the holy tribunal of the Inquisition, in his kingdom. And although this pope, for a long while, and oftentimes refused it, through the vigorous endeavors of the Jews who, to their utmost, opposed the royal petition, for the Jews always hated this holy tribunal, as others do to this day. For what reason, they know best. Yet at length, with difficulty, he granted it in the form of law. January 16th, 1531. Now, keep in mind that the Jews in Spain and Portugal and within the Roman dominion were black, brown, swarthy, dark-skinned Jews. As the following quote reads, it reads, "He was of a middle size. He had good features in his face, the skin somewhat black, black curly hair, long eyebrows, and of the same color, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from Portuguese Jews." All right. Now, the Inquisition was the Pope's police, judge, jury, and executioner, all rolled up into one institution. Their primary focus was to stamp out all remnants of the religion of the rebellious house of Judah. To carry out this purpose, the Pope outlawed all practices or beliefs that he, being the so-called replacement of Christ, did not create, authorize, or approve. Let's take a closer look at the things outlawed by the Pope and the Inquisition. And the following reference reads, "And first, if you know or have heard that any man or woman have kept or observed any Sabbath, according to the rites, ceremonies, and observances of the law of Moses, and on the said days have put on clean a fresh shirt and other garments, or better, handsomer and holy clothes, or have laid clean napkins on the table and clean sheets on the bed in honor of the said Sabbath, or have not blown up or nor kindled their fire, or have abstained from all their work on the said Sabbath, and begun to keep them from Friday evening, or who have celebrated the Passover of unleavened bread, beginning this sort of food with lettuce, parsley, and other green herbs, or have observed the Passover of tabernacles, by fixing up green burls or rich tapestry, feasting and accepting each other's invitation to eat and drink, or if they expect the Messiah promised in the law, or have said that the Messiah promised in the law is not yet come, but is to come, and that they yet expect him to deliver them from that bondage, which they say they are under, and to lead them into the promised land. And as you can see, these are just a few of the things that were outlawed by the Pope. And ironically, these are things that both Christ and the apostles observed when they walked the earth. And also, this doctrine of the Pope was an all-out assault on the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. All right, well, some of the things outlawed by the Pope, by the one who calls himself the replacement of Christ, he outlaws the Most High's Sabbath, which is the fourth of the 10 Commandments, which was written by the very finger of the Most High Yah himself. And the Pope also outlaws resting on the Sabbath, as well as outlawing all of the Most High's holy days or his feast days, including Passover and Tabernacles. And finally, but not limited to, the Pope also outlaws the Jews believing that the Messiah will deliver them from their present bondage. Now, keep in mind, the Christian church, led by the Pope, didn't persecute the Jews because they didn't believe in Christ. because according to references, some Jews did in fact believe in Christ. Instead, the Roman Christian church persecuted the Jews, or the rebellious house of Yehuda, for believing or for observing the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. And in turn, they made it against the law to do so. Now, let's read the following Bible verses to see how the Most High, Yah, Christ, and the apostles felt about Yah's Sabbaths, about his holy days. Now, for this, let's go over to Leviticus chapter 23, and let's start at verse 1. And it reads, And Yah spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of Yah, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, or holy gatherings. Even these are my feast. Now notice in this verse, it says these are my feasts, which means these are the feasts of the Most High Yah. Now, continuing on, let's read verse 3. It says, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest and holy convocation, or a holy gathering. You shall do no work therein, and it is the Sabbath of Yah in all your dwellings. So again, we see that this is Yah's Sabbath. It's not the Sabbath of the Jews, but this is in fact the Sabbath of the Most High Yah. Now let's go over to verse 4, and it reads, These are the feast of Yah, even holy convocations, or holy gatherings, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. In the 4th day of the 1st month at even is Yah's Passover. So again, we see that this is the Most High's Passover. And if we continue with verse 6, it reads, And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yah. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. All right. Now let's go over to our next quote, our next scripture. And for this, let's do Exodus chapter 12. And let's drop down to verse 17. And it reads, And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore shall you observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever. So notice that the instructions from the Most High Yah is that this ordinance, or this observation of this day, of this feast day, is forever. All right, so now let's drop down to verse 24, and it reads, actually, let's start at verse 23, and it reads, For Yah will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he seeth the blood upon the lintel and on the 2 side posts, Yah will pass over the door, and will not suffer the destroyer to come in unto your houses to smite you. And you shall observe this thing for an ordinance to thee and to thy sons forever. All right. So we notice that these holy days were in fact supposed to be observed forever. All right. Now for our next scripture. Let's read Matthew verse 26. And let's start at verse 2. And it reads, actually, I'll start at verse 1 and read down. And it says, And it came to pass when Yeshua had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, You know that after 2 days is the feast of Passover, and the Son of Man is betrayed to be crucified. All right, so now let's also drop down to verse 17, and it reads, Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Yeshua, saying unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare thee to eat the Passover? So here we see that Christ and his disciples were not only observing the feast of unleavened bread, but they were also observing the feast of Passover. Christ and the apostles. And let's see what Christ says. And he says, and he said, go into the city to such a man and say unto him, the master saith, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. And verse 18 reads, and he said, go into the city to such a man and say unto him, the master saith, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. All right, so now we see here clearly that Christ and his disciples observed the Passover. Now let's move over to our next reference, next quote. And for this, let's go over to Mark chapter 14 and verse 12. And it reads, and the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, where wilt thou go, that we go and prepare, that thou mayest eat the Passover? All right, so again, we see that Christ and the disciples observed the Passover. All right, so for our next quote, it comes from Luke chapter 2, verse 41, and it reads, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover. All right, so we see that even Christ's parents went to Jerusalem to observe the Passover. And then last but not least, this comes from Acts chapter 20 in verse 6, where it reads, and we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days. All right. So we see that even after the death and resurrection of Christ, that the apostles still observed the feast of unleavened bread. All right. Well, next, let's take a look at the way in which the Christian church persecuted and killed those of the rebellious house of Judah, because they refused to abandon the laws, statutes, commandments, and the holy days and the Sabbaths of the Most High Yah. Portugal. For example, the following reference reads, these miserable people, as well as the Jews who then abounded in Spain, and The house of Judah was persecuted so severely by the Christian church that they were all but wiped out from the face of Europe. As the following quote reads, and it reads, 10 persons only were relaxed, and 170 subjected to penance. Those who were burnt had relapsed into Judaism. The Jews had been so severely persecuted in the preceding reigns that scarcely any remained. Now, during the time of the Inquisition, the rebellious house of Judah almost always made up the greatest portion of those who were killed by the church. These reads on the 7th and still a prisoner, hopeless and despairing. Should friendly death not intervene, the terrible patience of the Inquisition was nearly certain to triumph in the end. And the authorities all agree upon the effectiveness of this delay. And on to our next reference, which reads, from the hall of the tribunal, the prisoner was led immediately unto the torture chamber. This was a sort of subterranean prison or ward, dark and unhealthy. Now, as a quick side note, note that these prisons were below ground. They were sometimes even underneath the floor of the very sanctuary in the Christian church. Now, let's keep reading, and it reads, from the hall of the tribunal, the prisoner was led immediately into the torture chamber. This was a sort of subterranean prison or ward, dark and unhealthy. It was also surrounded with thick and solid walls to prevent the cries of the victim from being heard on the outside. In the torture chamber, the accused found himself in the presence of 4 masked men. whom he had seen in the hall. On every side surrounded them were instruments of torture, such as iron boots, cords, enormous nails, thumb screws, etc. And in a distant corner, a lighted brazier, whose lurid flames cast a deadly light on all these somber objects. Before coming to this dungeon, the accused had to pass through winding, moist, and slippery passageways. He was preceded by a turnkey and followed by 4 constables, all armed. Flight and resistance were impossible. And our next reference reads, both bishop and inquisitor ought rightfully to be present. The prisoner was shown the implements of torture and urged to confess. On his refusal, he was stripped and bound by the executioners, and again entreated to speak, with promise of mercy in all cases in which mercy could be shown. This frequency produced the desired results. Skipping ahead, in the case of continued obstinacy, additional implements of torture were exhibited, and the sufferer was told that he would be subjected to them all in turn. If still undaunted, he was unbound, and the next or third day was appointed for renewal of the affliction. According to the rule, torture could not be applied but once, but this, like all other rules for protection of the accused, was easily eluded. It was only necessary to order not a repetition, but a continuance of the torture. And no matter how long the interval, the holy causes were able to continue it indefinitely. And our next reference reads, the horrid barbarities which are still practiced under the cloak of religion in Spanish prisons of the Holy Inquisition would be scarcely credible to an English reader if they were not too well attested to leave any doubt whatsoever of their existence. The Jesuits of the Inquisition in Portugal had also 3 prisons appropriated to the same purpose, one in Lisbon, another in Evora, and a third in Coimbra. I was informed by the guards and other inferior officers of the Inquisition that they were in the practice of employing at least 5 different species of torture inflicted on innocent individuals, either by way of revenge for some imaginary offense against the gross ordinances of popery, or else for the purpose of extorting confessions from the wretched victims concerning any subject the principal inquisitors thought fit to propose. These different kinds of torture, which they dignify with the name of the treatment, are as follows: the swinging treatment, the running treatment, the sharp treatment, the water treatment, and the fire. However, all agree in stating that the sufferers of the prisoners were greater under the water treatment than that of the roasting of feet. It is usual for one of the principal inquisitors to be present during the infliction of these abominable cruelties, in order to give direction for varying the mode of punishment according to the circumstance, until they extort something like a confession from the wretched victim. It is also not uncommon for the lives of the wretched victims to fall a sacrifice during the tortures, to which they are subjected, or in other words, that they die. In that case, their bodies are thrown into holes or pits, and quicklime thrown over them, so as to speedily consume the flesh, is all destroyed. The bones are then preserved in boxes with the initials of the victims on each box, and kept in a room appropriated for that purpose, called the bone room. Now, let's pause for a moment to confirm who was getting persecuted in great numbers by the Inquisition, by the church. We read that it was the Jews who were persecuted and killed by the church so severely that they were all but completely wiped out of Europe. We also read that the Jews made up the majority of those who were in prison. And with that in mind, let's cross-check our findings using an additional reference. Let's read about the physical description of those who were in prison and killed by the Inquisition. And the following reference reads, having dressed himself and put on a black garment striped with white lines, and a pair of drawers, which they had brought for him, he was led into the galleries, where he was joined about 200 other prisoners, all arranged against the walls. They were mostly colored men, there being only about 12 white persons among them. The Inquisition persecuted and killed colored people. These people made up the majority of those killed by the church under the authority of the Pope, who calls himself the replacement of Christ. Again, the church persecuted the rebellious house of Judah by first arresting them, then confiscating their property, torturing them. Then, if they did not submit to the Pope's doctrine, they were condemned to die at the Alto de Fe. Alto de Fe, called the Axe of Faith, was the last stop for the rebellious house of Judah. After being arrested and enduring great torture, the patience of the Inquisition inquisitor had come to an end. At last, they sentenced Judah to death by fire. If they accepted Christianity now, they would be strangled before being burned. However, if they persisted with Yah's laws, statutes, and commandments to the end, they would be burned alive. Now, a very important note about the Alto de Fe: the Christian church chose a special day to burn or kill its colored, black, brown, swarthy, dark-skinned descendants of the house of Yehuda. The church preferred to burn its colored people on Sunday, during Sunday service, as the following reference reads. When a competent number of prisoners are convicted of heresy, either by their own voluntary or exhorted confession, or upon the evidence of witnesses, a day is fixed by the chief inquisitor for a gold delivery, which is called by them an act of faith, and which is always upon a Sunday. And our next reference reads, Sunday became prescribed for it, and as no other sermons were allowed on that day in the city, it was forbidden to be held on Advent Sunday or any other principal feast days. Notice was given in advance from all the pulpits, summoning all the people to be present and obtain the indulgence of 40 days. A staging was erected in the center of the church, on which the penitents were placed, surrounded by the secular and clerical officials. The sermon was delivered by the inquisitor, after which the oath of obedience was administered to the representatives of the civil power, and a solemn decree of excommunication was fulfillment against all who should in any manner impede the operations of the holy office. Then the notary commenced reading the confessions one by one in the vulgar tongue, and as each was finished, the culprit was asked if he acknowledged it to be true. Care being taken, however, only to do this when he was known to be truly penitent, and not likely to create scandal by a denial. On his replying in the affirmative, he was asked whether he would repent or lose body and soul by persevering in heresy. And our next reference reads, the prisoners tortured. Auto de fe generally solemnized the first Sunday in Advent. Now, auto de fe ceremonies would start with a procession or a parade to the church or the city square. Bishops and clergy of the church would hold torches as they slowly walked with those condemned to be burned. The colored people destined to be burned wore sanbenitos, which included a tall cone-shaped hat. While walking to the place of execution, church bishops would continuously urge its colored prisoners, or the rebellious house of Judah, to reconcile with the Church of Rome, or in other words, throw away Yah's laws, statutes, and commandments. Once they reached the church or the city square, they were tied to stakes with wood piles underneath. And the following reference reads, it reads, so great was his bitterness and fury against those unhappy people, that in a boasting manner and by way of a proverb, he used to say, give me a Jew, and I'll render him back to you to the burnt. The prisoners were tied to stakes with wood piles underneath for burning. Their faces were also tied to the poles to make it easier to burn the beards of the rebellious house of Yehuda. Just before the prisoners were to be burned, a bishop would ask one last time if they would be reconciled to the Church of Rome. And if they refused, they were burned. As the following reference reads, and it reads, with the aforementioned board, they turned about the people, and the Jesuits do spend near a quarter of an hour in exhorting the professed to be reconciled to the Church of Rome, which if the professed refuse to be, the Jesuits come down, and the executioner ascends, and having turned the professed off the ladder upon the seat, and chained their bodies close to the stakes, he leaves them, and the Jesuits go up to them a second time to renew their exhortation to them, and at parting tell them that they leave them to the devil, who is standing at their elbow to receive their souls, and carry them with him into the flames of hellfire, so soon as they are out of their bodies. Upon this, a great shout is raised, and as soon as the Jesuits are off the ladder, the cry is, let the dogs' beards be made. Let the dogs' beards be made. In other words, burn the beards of the men of the rebellious house of Yehuda, which is done by thrusting of flaming furs fastened to a long pole against their faces. And this inhumanity is commonly continued until their faces are burned. And the following reference reads, the prisoners that are to be burned alive, besides a familiar, which all have, the rest have a Jesuit on each hand of them, who are continually preaching to them to abjure their heresies, or in other words, to stop their heresies or stop obeying the laws, statutes, and commandments. And it reads, but if they offer to speak anything in defense of the doctrine, for professing which they are going to suffer death, they are immediately gagged and not suffered to speak anymore. This I saw done to a prisoner presently after he came out of the gates of the Inquisition. Skipping ahead, there is a scaffold erected which may hold 2,000 or 3,000 people. At the one end sit the inquisitors, and at the other end the prisoners. And in the same order as they walked in the procession, those that are to be burnt being seated on the highest benches behind the rest, and which may be 10 feet above the floor of the scaffold. After some prayers and a sermon, which is made upon excommunions on the Inquisition, and invectives against heretics, a secular priest ascends a desk, which stands near the middle of the scaffold, and who, having first taken all abjurations of the penitents, who kneel before him one by one, in the same order as they walked in the procession, at last he recites the final sentence of the Inquisition upon those who are to be put to death. The proceedings of the auto de fe concluded when the descendants of the rebellious house of Yehuda was burned and killed by the church. The church often commemorated the burning of these colored people by hanging clothes representing the deceased up high in the rafters of the church. This served as a stark reminder for those who would think to turn back to the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High Yah. However, not all auto de fe's unfolded as planned. This particular auto de fe was one that was remembered for many years to come. Let's take a closer look. A Jew and his wife and a daughter of about 13 years of age, being condemned to be burnt, while the father and mother were burning. They set the child loose from its fetters, and the priests got around it with a view of converting it by the united force of their rhetoric and the terrors of immediately undergoing the same cruel death. The child, after seemingly to listen for a while to their orator, gave her answer by jumping into the flames. This heroic act of a 13-year-old girl shocked the people attending the auto de fe to its core, that her sacrifice shut down the auto de fe in Madrid for 12 years. No one knows how many lives her selfless act saved for those 12 years. However, we do know that she cherished the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High Yah above life itself. Israel, these are your forefathers. All right. Well, before we conclude video 3 in our Hidden Hebrews 3 series, I'd like to provide one additional reference. While listening to this documentary, you may have wondered how the atrocities of the Inquisition apply to the modern church. Now, the modern day churches all come out of the Catholic Church. For example, if you see the chart on your screen, you'll see on the far right, you'll see the modern churches like Methodists and Baptists and Adventists and Pentecostal. However, you'll also notice that on the left-hand side, all of these churches come out of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, although these churches may differ from one another, they do share some common values, some of which were values that were decreed by the Pope, who is the so-called replacement of Christ, and the Roman Emperor Constantine. So let's take a look at one of these shared values which were adopted by the Protestant and Lutherans during the time of the Inquisition. And it reads, "It will not do so to say that these persecutions were all by the Catholics. During most of the time they were in progress, there was no other Christian church. But even after the Protestants gained the ascendancy, there was no abatement of these cruelties. Luther and Calvin, while claiming the utmost liberty of conscience for themselves, denied it to all others. Luther denounced Copernicus, the astronomer, and says his biographer, he looked with a favorable eye on the adoption of violent measures for the conversion of the Jews and others." So although these churches were different, they all shared their hatred for the children of Yehuda. All right. Well, let's wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground in our video. We learned that the parents of the rebellious house of Yehuda were severely persecuted and killed by the church, headed by the Pope. We also learned that the church executed the families of Yehuda on Sunday during church service. And we also learned that the main reason that the families of Yehuda were executed was because they followed the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High Yah. So I'd like to thank you for watching the video. Yah willing, I'll add the references to the description section in this video as well. Please be sure to like the video and share it with as many as possible. Very few people know about the Inquisition and its toll on the people of color. It's a history that every Israelite should know because these are your forefathers. Well, thanks again for watching, and shalom.
Deuteronomy 28. And it shall come to pass, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Most High thy power, to observe and do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Most High God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. But if thou wilt not hearken to the voice of the Most High, to observe and do all his commandments, then curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee.
All these lies and delusions, wake me up, show me up.
seek out the ways of the heathen to make a covenant with Satan's government. Turn their face away from the Most High, evil desire. 2 Kings 17 said they passed their sons and daughters through the fire. They begin cutting divine spiritual ties, clinging to the heathen lies. Evil spirits bind, breaking souls, breaking spirits, ripping flesh, breaking minds. Running from the Most High wrath on the blood-stained path. 70 AD, Israelites fall. The Most High's chosen seed go into captivity. Hebrew Israelites watch nations rise, they watch nations fall. Four beasts, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. We pray for the fall of the fourth beast. Under the iron foot of Rome, we long to go home. A hopeless nation lies dead in the valley of the dry bones. Simulation of Shemites to Hamite clones. Israelites wrong.
All these lies and delusions wake me up, show me a new dawn. Open your eyes, rise, children of the light. I am awakened, I am awakened.
Israelites enslaved to build a wicked nation. No true identity, only tribulations. Fed scraps of swine, we eat the worst of the animal kind. Used, confused, they set us in high places to be abused. Control the tribe, control the tribe. Our leaders take bribes to continue the lies. Fourth beast behind the scene in the skies, watching with the all-seeing eye. The heathen take flight into a new world order. Hebrews sleepwalking into a wicked system that's gonna fall. Awake, awake, reject Babylon. Hear the trumpet of awakening throughout the day and night. Awake, the Most High's people, the Israelites. The earth has swallowed the flood of deception. The harvest ripe for collection. His people are walking, standing like a mighty army. The Most High has summoned, the Hebrews are coming. Awake, come out of captivity. Awake, you who sleep. Arise, receive the Most High's laws and commandments. We are the Israelites.
In my mind, all these lies and delusions wake me up, show me a new dawn. Open your eyes, rise, children of the light. I am awakened, I am awakened. Clear my mind and my soul. Gave me a new mind. Oh, made me whole. I rise up.
Quam.
I'll be a new light.
Quam.
I am awakened.
Quam.
I am awakened.
Quam. Yes, you are.
I am awakened. All these lies and delusions wake me up, show me a new dawn. Open your eyes, rise, children of the light. I am awakened, I am awakened. Israelite's journey.
Thank you for tuning into Bethel, bhgtv. Like, share, and subscribe. Now our host, Pastor Johnson.
Wow, man, what a show. Brother Benaiah Israel, he does it again. Let me tell you something, brothers and sisters, that the information on that was phenomenal. You know, when it comes to identifying the people of the book, there was a lot of information put there. Just remember when the Spanish Inquisition took place, the Hebrews were moved out of Spain and Portugal into the west coast of Africa, and that was the same time the transatlantic slave trade was taking place. And in some cases, they did not even go from Spain and Portugal to the west coast of Africa. They went straight to the Americas. So this is some good information. Now we're going to be tuning in on our final part, and this is called color. Again, this is not something to bring. This is not about racism. This is not about anything. This is Bible history. And this is such a great time during the Black History Month to bring all of this information to the forefront. You're not going to get this in school. You're not going to get this in seminary school. You're not going to get this through mainstream Christianity or theology. But this is why we're bringing this information to you so that you can have it. These are very important information that we're getting from documented history. And again, these books are very old books, very, very old books. When you look at the books of John Ogilvy, who was the inventor of the inch to scale on the mapping system, and he reported to the king as he was choreographing out the land and what was taking place. These are just some notations that he made. And again, these books cost $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. It makes you wonder, why are these books costing so much? Why are they so high in price? And let me say this. It's not because they're the original books, by the way. If you wanted to buy the book in print, in regular print as it is, it costs you $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. And Brother Benea Israel has gone through an exhaustive effort to bring this information to us. Shout outs to Brother Benea Israel. When this COVID is over, we're just going to continue bringing information. And I can't wait. Really, what we're doing is when he brings that information, I bring feast days. And I want you to stay tuned because we have the weeks to come. We're getting ready to go into the feast days. We're getting ready to go into what do the feast days mean. Not only how do you calculate them, when are they kept, but the who, where, when, why, and how. But enough for that, brothers and sisters. We're going to get into this next segment, and it's called Color. You will enjoy this. Shout out to Brother Benea Israel and for the work that he has put together. And I want you to enjoy. This is our last segment until next week. God bless you and enjoy.
Shalom, shalom, Israel. It's your brother Benaya Ben Israel, coming to you with a new series or new video series called Hebrew Color Countdown. That's Hebrew Color Countdown. Now, you may have wondered, what color were the ancient Israelites? You may have wondered, what color were the ancient Israelites? And if you ever wondered that, you may have looked at movies, you may have got a book, you may have looked at YouTube videos. And for the most part, we know that the videos today are whitewashed. That they could make a video about, or a movie about, Black Africa, Egypt, and, cast, all the characters would be cast as Europeans. So we know that there's a degree of whitewashing that takes place in, these movies today. Or maybe you've looked at some of these books that are out of mainstream today. Now, again, what we've noticed is that the books that were published, published after, I'd say like the 1900s, we found that the history in those books changed, right? So that the descriptions and the histories, 1900 and newer, say something, whereas the history in the books that were published in the 1800s and older, they say something totally different. So, depending on what books you may have read, you may have walked away with an incorrect understanding of what the Hebrew Israelites look like. Same thing goes for YouTube. I know that there's a couple of videos out there that try to refute the concept of we call it Black Hebrew Israelites. It's really Hebrew Israelites, but the concept of Black Hebrew Israelites. You have videos such as those put out by the Apologetics Ministry or Stephen Anderson, and according to those videos, there's no way that the Hebrew Israelites are black. They could be any color under the sun, but there is no way that the Hebrew Israelites are black. So with that in mind, I thought it'd be appropriate to put together a video series where we go through several references and strictly just read the references to see what the references say. So for the Hebrew Color Countdown, we're going to review 50 references. That's right. No, don't turn your YouTube off just yet. I'm going to break it up into two videos. If not, I may blow it out to 3. But in the first set of videos, I think we're going to try to do from 50 to 25 references, from 50 to 25. And for the most part, those references will focus on the Spanish Jews and the Portuguese Jews. Basically, the Jews that were part of the transatlantic slave trade. And then I think for the last part of the Color Countdown series, we'll focus on the Jews of Malabar, because I think that's a good case study as far as showing you the different types of Jews out there. So we'll have a lot of interesting things to cover on that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. I want to try to keep these videos under 45 minutes or an hour at most. All right, so on to our first reference. So for our first reference, we have the Travels of Holland and the United Provinces. Now, just an FYI, I may not read every single title and author, and that's just in an effort to speed things up because we do have a lot of references to cover. However, I will at least show it somewhere on the screen. So if you want to make note of the references yourselves, just press pause, and then once you got the reference, you can keep moving. All right? This reference speaks to the Jews that are in Amsterdam. So, and I'm going to read quite a bit of this one because this one talks about the day in the life of the Jews, and then it gives a brief description of the Jews. So let's go ahead and get started. This day, being Saturday, June the 14th, is observed as the Jews' Sabbath, who are about 300 families seated in this town, most Portugals. A street they call the Jew Street. They have 3 synagogues there. I was this day at their synagogue from 9 to 12:30. Then they concluded. Return at 3 and continue until evening. They have 15 whom they call their Parnassus. These are the governors and judges. They have all white mantles of a kind of linen, but short. These they wear over their hats, which they never put off during all their being in church. They have 3 sorts of which perform their divine ordinances, their Levitical rites and ceremonies. The sons of Aaron, who represented the priests who carried their Alquran, the 5 books of Moses, covered with a cloth of gold and whereon were diverse little bell pendants placed in the form of a crown, which was fetched out of a little cabinet. This represented their tabernacle. The sons of Aaron are their predicants, and also read the books of Moses. The Levites sing the reading psalms of David in the tomb, and the Parnassuses appoint of the Israelites such to read as they think fit. The sons of Aaron and Levites have longer white robes than the rest. Here in this congregation, no good order, no great zeal, and devotion here appearing. Much time is spent singing and talking. We went hence to an Englishman and his wife, lately turned Jew, as it said, merely to enrich themselves. Very obstinate and ignorant both. He is a merchant of tobacco. 'Tis said his wife, being a handsome woman, was a courtesan in London. They deny all the New Testament. Their men most black, full of hair, and insatiably given unto women. Okay, well, just to reiterate, in this first reference, the Portuguese Jews living in Amsterdam were identified as most black. Most black, okay? All right, let's go to our next quote here. And I'm just going to start midway here. You can see the reference off to the left. And midway down, you'll see where it says, King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews. This is all the Jews in Portugal. All the Spanish Jews in Portugal. That's a key note here. But he expelled all the Spanish Jews in Portugal to the island of St. Thomas, which he had discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. Now, just a quick note here, if you've taken the time to look at any of the other videos, you know that we brought out references to show you that, in fact, that the Portuguese and some of these other European nations actually expelled their Jews and placed them on the west coast of Africa. And in particular, these were Jews. These were Israelites from the tribe of Judah, from the tribe of Benjamin, or from the tribe of Levi. So these are they that were placed on the west coast of Africa. But let's finish this reference, and it says, and from these banished Jews, I'm going to say it again, and from these banished Jews, the black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luanga. For clarity here, it says the black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luanga. So the takeaway here is that these Portuguese Jews, or these Spanish Jews that were exiled from Portugal, are black. And of course, the Spanish word for black is Negroes. So there's also some interesting connections there as well. All right, so let's go over to our next reference, and here's the title. Give you a moment to look that over, and I'm just going to go ahead and turn the page. Let's go to our next reference on page 118, and it reads, in regard to the human race, it has been shown abundantly and historically that each of the external differences often ceases to be characteristics. Thus, the black color is found not only in individuals, as the black Jews of Portugal, but in the tribes as Barcaris on the Red Sea, whose hair and character are perfectly Semitic. All right, let's read that just one more time. This is the last sentence. It says, thus the black color is found not only in individuals as the black Jews of Portugal. So again, this is pointing out that the Jews in Portugal were black. So anyone that says in their videos that the Jews could be anything but black, obviously hadn't read these references, because this was the understanding in the books back in the 1800s. Okay. All right. So we've got that reference. Let's go to our next reference. If you ever thought like I did that the African Americans or blacks we were the cursed seed of Ham. It's like, you blacks are the cursed seed of Ham. Well, there's a reason for that. And this is another nugget of information. So what we'll look at in this reference is that thought originated or perpetuated by the Pope during the transatlantic slave trade. So in our previous videos, in our other series, we showed that the Pope authorized the transatlantic slave trade. And that's what kicked things off, right? And that was also during the time of the persecution of the Jews. And we saw that in our previous series that all that's related. So the whole persecution of the Jews and the transatlantic slave trade, that's all related because those people were Jews. But what we find here is that when we read this reference, and this is about the Pope Pius V, and it reads, Pius V, by nature a sinister ecclesiastic, delighting in the persecution, who treated Jews as the cursed children of Ham. Let me read that one again. This is Pope Pius V, by nature a sinister ecclesiastic, delighting in persecution, who treated Jews as the cursed children of Ham. So if you ever wonder where that thought came from, that the black Jews were the cursed seed of Ham, this reference points it out to you. And just to read a little bit more, just kind of get context, it says, this Pope was succeeded by Gregory VIII, I believe it's VIII, who had been skillfully trained to fanaticism by the Jesuits and the Theratine monks. As regards Jews, Gregory was a most consistent follower of the cruelty of his predecessor. So this is just an FYI, an extra reference I threw in there, just so that you can understand where the thought of the cursed children of Ham came from as far as being applied to the Jews. Okay. All right, and we're just going to read this reference to, you may be thinking, wait a minute, you're throwing extra references in there. This is going to be over 50. Well, truth be told, it may be over 50. And I actually thought, just kind of sidebar here, but I actually thought that, what greater proof than to lay out 50 references that point out that the Jews were black? You can't really refute that, right? But if I were to put together 100, there's no discussion. So, but 50 is a finishing move, right? Laying out 50 references is a finishing move. But I thought that, I may circle back on this series and add to it and try to get it up to 100. So just an FYI. All right. So this particular reference speaks to, I'm just pointing out that the Jews here were placed on the west coast of Africa. So it says the northern coast of Africa and the inhabitable regions inland were full of Jews of Spanish descent. Notice here it says Spanish descent, but in our previous reference, it was, I think, 2 references back, it said Portuguese Jews, right? And again, there's a reason for that. It's because the Spanish Jews were exiled and they moved into Portugal, and then King John expelled those Spanish Jews from Portugal and sent them to Africa. So, and that's where that comes from. But here, I'm just calling out that these Jews were on the west coast of Africa and that they were there in great numbers. So let's read this one more time. It says, the northern coast of Africa and the inhabitable regions inland were full of Jews of Spanish descent. They had congregated there in great numbers during the century from the persecution of 1391 to their total expulsion, which was covered in some other references in a previous series. All right, so let's leave that reference alone and let's go over to our next reference, this is an interesting one by Benedict Spinoza. Now, Benedict Spinoza is a Jew himself. So what better reference than to have a Jew describe himself, his own race, right? So this is Benedict Spinoza, and it says he was, and this is a description of the Jew. It says he was of a middle size. He had good features in his face. The skin somewhat black. Black curly hair, long eyebrows, and of the same color, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from Portuguese Jews. Just make sure that we understand what we just read. It says the skin somewhat black curly hair, long eyebrows, and of the same color, so that one might easily know by his looks that he was descended from the Portuguese Jews. So the takeaway here is that their understanding back then was the black-skinned person was a Jew. Like when they looked at the black-skinned person, they could look at him and tell, oh, that's a Portuguese Jew just by the way that he looks. And also for reference, this one comes from a book from Ronald Sanders' Lost Tribes. This is one of those things where you have a quote of a quote, and this is I'm also breaking our rules, so to speak. And this is from a book that was published back in the late or the early 1900s. This one, I put this one in just because it has some good info. But this is from you see it on the screen there, Dr. Alan Godby from Duke University. And so he actually publishes a picture of the Jews on the west coast of Africa. And you can see if we read the little blurb at the bottom where it says, Judean Hebrews from Upper Senegal, West Africa. It says, these men are the descendants of the ancient Judean nation. Their ancestors fled from Jerusalem before the arrival of the Roman armies, which were under the command of Vespasian and General Titus in 70 AD. Then as you can tell, the ethnicity of the Jews here are what we would call today as the black man. All right? So that's an interesting reference here because it actually has a picture. And of course, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay, all right. So let's go on to our next reference here is the Nautical Magazine. You can see the full title off to the left. And for this one has a couple of sections. So I'm going to, let's see, am I going to read this whole thing? I guess so. Let's start here at the top, the red square here. It says, the inhabitants of Luango do not differ materially from those of Gabon and Cape Lopez. It is probable that the Jewish type of character above mentioned forms a large element of the population there than it does on the Pongo coast. And this, it was doubtless which led the Roman Catholic missionaries who were there, who labored here during the 16th and 17th centuries, to the conclusion that they had found black Jews in Luango. And just to reiterate here, it says, to the conclusion that they had found black Jews in Luango. Jumping down to the next paragraph where it says, Barbert states that in the reign of King John II, again, what you'll notice is that the common denominator here is that you'll see a lot of references to King John. And a lot of things went down during the reign of King John that happened to the Jews. So just an FYI. But it says, and about the close of the 15th century, it says large numbers of Jews were expelled from Portugal and taken to the coast of southern Guinea. And if you don't know, that's the west coast of Africa. So again, this is just yet another reference that points out the fact that large numbers of Jews were expelled from Portugal and taken to the coast of southern Guinea. So that's where all these black Portuguese Jews were taken from. Okay. Now I'm not going to read the rest of it. You can read the rest of it there. Although there is some good information here where it talks about. I actually just talked myself into reading it here. It says, let's see, it is possible that the Jewish type of character noticed at the Gabon and Luango may have originated from this source. It says, but if so, it is unknown to the present inhabitants of the country, and it would have been somewhat singular if the Roman Catholic missionaries at Luango had not detected this circumstance, instead of regarding them as a pure African family of Jews. So I know I skipped some here, but it says the Roman Catholic missionaries regarded these Jews as a pure African family of Jews. Okay, all right, so on to our next quote. Okay, so we have two here, and on the left is page 79. It reads, descended from one common stock and prohibited by the most sacred institution from intermarrying with people of other nations, and yet dispersed according to the divine prediction into every country on the globe. This one people is marked with the colors of all: fair in Britain and Germany, brown in France and Turkey, swarthy, which means that's dark black, blue black, in Portugal and in Spain, olive in Syria and Chaldea, tawny and copper-colored in Arabia and in Egypt. Whilst they are black at Congo in Africa. Let's keep reading. It says the old colony, I'm on the right-hand side on page 80. It says the old colony are the black Jews and have been longer subjected to the influence of climate. The hair of the black Jews are curly, showing a resemblance to the Negro. The white Jews are as dark as the gypsies, and each generation growing darker. All right, so we'll get into these different divisions of Jews, so to speak, in the next series. But the point in this first half is pointing out that the Portuguese and the Spanish Jews were black Jews, and these, in fact, were the ones that were part of the transatlantic slave trade. So that when you go to these YouTube sites and you hear about the Hebrew Israelites, or some folks say that the black Hebrew Israelites, and you hear people out there that would refute that and say there's no way that the Jews could be black. They could be anything but black. This totally blows that assertion out of the water. Okay, all right. So on to our next quote. You'll see it there, Tribute for the Negro. I'll read the whole title there. And on this one's interesting. It's from William Armistead, and this was from page 66. And let's see, where should I start from here? Let's see, I guess I can start to read the whole thing. It says, according to several accurately informed scientific writers, such as Walt Waddington or Dr. Ruppel and Mr. Rosette, there are black races in Africa among the genuine descendants of immigrants from Arabia. Detachments of the Arabian family immigrated, 11 or 1200 years ago, into northern Africa, where they have founded states of some importance, and in some instances they have passed into perfectly black complexion. That's the blue-black. Although improved in form and stature, and notwithstanding that they reside to the north of the Negro countries. It says, a remarkable fact in the country of Luango, in the Empire of Congo, is that the country, according to a statement which was fully credited by Oldendorp, himself a writer of most correct judgment and of unimpeachable veracity, contains many Jews settled in it, who retain their religious rights and distinct habits which keep them isolated from other nations. Though thus separate from the African population, they are black. You get that? They are black. And these are, and just to kind of paraphrase what the above paragraph said, it talked about the writers, or these scientific writers, that they were of unimpeachable veracity. So these were upstanding guys, is basically what it was saying. But if we keep reading, it says, let's see, where did I leave off? It says, they are black and resemble the other Negroes in every respect as to physical character. It says, it is probably in allusion to this case that Pennington, another writer, in his textbook says, the descendants of a colony of Jews, originally from Judea, settled on the coast of Africa, are black. Get that? They are black. All right. So I think you starting to develop a pattern here. You can see that these Jews were in fact called black Jews, and they were recognized as black Jews. And on your screen, this is just another view of the reference. In the previous page, I actually typed it up from here, but this is the actual reference here. And just a quick note here, at the very bottom, you'll see another box, but it says, the Portuguese who planted themselves on the coast of Africa a few centuries ago have been succeeded by descendants blacker than many Africans. So basically, when those Portuguese Jews got to Africa, what they're saying is that they became blacker or darker. Their descendants, their kids, and their children's children became darker over time. So that's why you have the different colors of Jews. Okay, so on to our next reference, and this is an interesting one. The narrative travels and discoveries in the northern and central Africa. So this is basically a journal. So we're going to read a journal entry from a guy that went to the west coast of Africa, and he's having a conversation. I believe it's with a sheik. A sheik on the west coast of Africa. And in this journal, this is what he wrote down. The conversation with, or sounded like it. This is at the bottom of the page. It says, "I have bought a sheep for $1, a coin with which he was not conversant. And he asked if it were true that they came out of the earth." So this is the explorer talking. It says, "The explanation pleased him." Now the sheik is getting ready to speak. He says, "You are not Jews?" said he. "No," said I. "Christian then?" "Even so." Even so means yes. Replied I. "I have read of you. You are better than Jews," said he. "Are Jews white like you?" "No," replied I. And I'm just going to say that again. "No," replied I. "Rather more like yourself. Very dark." "Really?" said the sheik. Yeah, it's funny because that's what a lot of people say today when you tell them that the Jews are black and not white. They say, "Really?" So the sheik had the same reaction. So the sheik says, "Really?" said the sheik. "Why are they not quite white?" And then the explorer says, "They are a bad people." You got that? So just to read it one more time, it says, the explanation says, "You are not Jews?" said he. "No," said I. "Christian then?" "Even so," which means yes, replied I. "I have read of you. You are better than Jews," said he. "Are Jews white like you?" "No," replied I. "Rather more like yourself. Very dark." "Really?" said the sheik. "Why are they not quite white?" "They are a bad people." Now, the interesting thing about this quote is that this is totally opposite of the identity of the Jews today. If you were to explain or describe a Jew, most people would describe the opposite of what this reference says. And that's where I said at the top of the video that the references, like the old references, this is the narrative that you'll find. You'll find that the old references talk about the Jews being black or very dark. But the new references speak to the present day Jews, and it describes them as Europeans or white. So our preference is obviously to use the older books because, of course, the older books were closer to the Jews. So that's that. Let's go to our next reference here. So it reads, "History." This is an interesting one. "History of the White Race, Volume 2." And I hope that as we're going through these references that you're coming across references that you've never seen before. These are references that are readily available, and some of them are hard to find. But these are references that are out there that pretty much anyone can get, download, search for them, that sort of thing. But not a lot of people have seen these references. These aren't references that are in mainstream, that I would say. So let's go ahead and read this one. I'm going to start at the second paragraph, and it says, "A number of Jews went out along Turkey and settled in Rome itself, while a small number settled in Gaul, in France. The Jews who went north and eventually west into Europe intermixed with many local white tribes along the way, to the point where today the Jews as a racial group are very diverse, with some being very white and others still showing, I'm going to read this one slow, and others still showing distinct dark Semitic traits. Did you get that? And others still showing distinct dark Semitic traits. So what's a Semitic trait? Dark. Okay? And if we keep reading, it says, "However, not all Jews went north. A significant portion of Jews went west along North African coast. along the North African coast, setting up Jewish communities all the way to Tunisia and finally crossing into southern Spain. So we talked about Spain earlier. Ashkenazim says the Jews who went into Europe via the east absorbed a substantial amount of European blood. They became the Ashkenazim, or European Jews. Those who settled in North Africa became known as the Sephardim. It says this division in Jewry exists to this day and is most marked in Israel, where were the two communities. It says the Ashkenazim, or light Jews, it says, and the Sephardim, or dark Jews, and it reads, dark because they did not mix with the number of Europeans that the Ashkenazim did. Okay, let's read that again. It says dark because they did not mix with the number of Europeans that the Ashkenazim did. Okay, so that's a good reference showing you the traits of a Semitic people and the traits of a European people. Now, another thing to note here is that this particular reference hypothesized that the reason why certain Jews lightened up was because of the intermixture with the European Jews. And there's a caveat there because what we mentioned in a previous video was that you have to understand that the Jews during the time of John Hyrcanus, and this was a time period between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there was a lot of history there that's not going over in the Christian churches today. So during that time period, there was the Greek captivity, and then of course the Roman captivity followed on his heels. But during the Greek captivity, the Edomites were forcefully converted over to Judaism. And according to Josephus, the Edomites also became Jews as well. So you not only had the ancient Jews, but then you also had another group of Jews called Edomite Jews. So you had two Jews. Then later on, you also had the Khazarian Jews. At the end of the day, you had the ancient Jews, the original Jews, then you had the Edomite Jews, and then you had these other Jews. So as you're reading, you always have to in the back of your mind, figure out like which group of Jews are they talking about? Like which group of Jews does this particular reference speak to? Okay, so you have to have that history when you're doing this research, or you could get lost. Okay. All right, so let's go over to our next reference, and this is a good one. This is one that I've shared previously in other videos, but it says this is The Negro in the New World by Harry Johnston. And on this one, it says in the footnote, this is where it says, the Jews are composed of 3 or 4 separate racial elements. The Asiatic Negroid strain. So those of you that are out there that would say that, all right, so maybe the Jews are dark. Okay, I'll give you that. That doesn't mean that they're black, right? You might say that doesn't mean that they're black as in the African-American black. Well, this reference speaks to that as well. Okay, so not only what we're saying is not only were they dark-skinned people, but they were also considered Negroid people as well. Okay, so let's read this. It says, the Jews are composed of 3 or 4 separate racial elements. The Asiatic Negroid strain shows itself occasionally in the curly hair, the long eye, and the proportion of the skull. The Jewish hybrids with the Negro in Jamaica and Guana reproduce most strikingly the Assyrian type. So the takeaway here is that the Jews were considered Negroid. Okay? All right, so let's go over to our next quote. This too is a good one on the classification and geographic distribution of mammalia. Let's go over to page 96 and 97. And here it reads, I'm going to start at the very top. It says, with reference to characteristic of color, which are extreme, we have now opportunities of knowing how much that character is the result of the influence of climate. So back in the day, they used to think that climate affected whether a person was light or dark or white or black, that sort of thing. Yeah. We know it more particularly by the most valuable mode of testing such influences, which we derive from the peculiarity of the Jewish race. It says, for 1800 years, that race has been dispersed in different latitudes and climates, and they have preserved themselves distinct from intermixture with other races of mankind. There are some Jews still lingering in the valleys of the Jordan, having been oppressed by the successive conquerors of Syria for ages. A low race of people, and described by trustworthy travelers as being as black as any of the Ethiopian races. You get that? All right, let me just read that again. It says, a low race of people, and described by trustworthy travelers. By trustworthy travelers, all right, you got that? As being as black as any of the Ethiopian races. Okay? So this is their understanding of the Jews. But let's keep reading on so we get some additional understanding, because he's going to describe some other Jews. So it says, others of the Jewish people participating in the European civilization. And if you remember in a couple of previous quotes, we read about Jews migrating to Europe, right? And about them intermarrying with the Europeans and lightening up. Well, let's see what this says. It says, others of the Jewish people participating in European civilization and dwelling in the northern nations show instances, not the whole, but it says show instances of the light complexion, the blue eyes, and the light hair of the Scandinavian families. Then it goes on to say, the condition of the Hebrews since their dispersion has not been such as to admit of much admixture by the prostitution of household slaves. So basically it's saying that, the Jews don't normally mix with other races. It says, we are thus led to account for the differences in color by the influence of climate without having to refer them to original or specific distinctions. So in other words, it's saying that they're left to hypothesize that the differences in color are due to climate. The differences in the color of the Jews are due to climate. Okay, all right. So that's a good reference. Our next reference just speaks to the Mavambo Jews, where it says, using my cursor here, it says the Mavambo Jews are known to Europeans as black Jews. Okay, on account of their Semitic features. You got it? Okay. So I hope by now you can see that reference after reference after reference are pretty much saying the same thing. Okay. All right. And let's go over to Gene Barbatt. If I remember correctly, I think Gene Barbatt, what he did was that he gathered information from ship captains that were going over to the west coast of Africa. So he compiled all of their information to come up with his information. But it says, Barbatt concludes that the blackness must be in the blood or race, adding the curious proof that Portuguese Jews resemble other Portuguese and Germans. Let me read that again. It says blackness must be in the blood or race, adding the curious proof. So the proof of the blackness is that the Portuguese Jews resemble other Portuguese and Germans. So not only were the Portuguese black, but the Germans were black. What we can take from here is that the race of the Jews as a whole were considered black. And I added this snippet in here where it just says the omission of one paragraph describing how the island was settled by deported Spanish Jews and black women from Angola. So again, if you're noticing, some references say Spanish Jews were deported to the west coast of Africa, whereas other references are pointing out that Portuguese Jews were exiled to Africa, and they're both correct. I just want to point out that they're both correct. It's just that the Spanish Jews, just to reiterate, Spanish Jews were exiled, and then they migrated into Portugal. And once they got into Portugal, that's where King John, our favorite king in these books here, King John took those Spanish Jews and then dumped them on the west coast of Africa. So that's why you see some of them refer to them as Spanish Jews, some are referred to as Portuguese Jews. But at least now you understand why certain people were called Negroes, which is the Spanish word for black, right? Because these were black Portuguese Jews, but they're actually Spanish Jews, so they're Negroes. They're the Spanish word for black. All right, so let's go over to our next reference. And you can see the reference there. Kind of combined several on this slide just to keep things compact. It says, a fact worthy the attention of travelers is that according to Oldendorp, the kingdom of Luango contains black Jews scattered throughout the country. They are despised by the Negroes who do not even deign to eat with them. They are occupied in trade and keep the Sabbath so strictly that they do not even converse on that day. They have a separate burying ground very far from any habitation. The tombs are constructed with masonry and ornamented with Hebrew inscriptions, the singularity of which excites the laughter of the Negroes, who discern in them only serpents and lizards and other reptiles. All right, so in our next quote down, it says, by J.C. Picard, it says, the Portuguese Jews are very dark. It's consistent with what we've read so far. And even Waits, in his book, he writes, an interesting gradation of all shades down to the black is exhibited by the Jews. Especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portugal. So again, the Jews in Spain and Portugal were dark, and they were especially dark according to Waits. Okay, all right. So we're establishing a pattern of black Jews, of dark Jews, especially of Portugal and Spain, and we're seeing reference after reference prove this fact out. So let's read some more. In this next reference, under the picture here, this is from Yosef ben Nathan, and it reads, why are the majority of Gentiles white and attractive, while the majority of Jews are black and ugly? Okay? Insult, he's kind of, I guess it's meant to insult the Jews, but by insulting the Jews, he's actually providing some information for us today that these Jews are black, right? All right, so let's go to the next reference on this one. It's at the bottom of your screen there, and this is also from a Jew, right? So this is can't get any better than a Jew describing his own people, right? So it says, we Jews, so he's counting himself as a Jew, right? So he's saying, we Jews are from a clean and white seed. Therefore, our faces are black. But you, from the red seed of menstruation, therefore your visages are pale and reddened. Let's read that one more time. Just make sure we understood what we read. It says, we Jews. So this is a Jew describing himself, right? He's describing his nation. It says, we Jews are from a clean and white seed, therefore our faces are black. But you, from the red seed of menstruation, therefore your visages are pale and reddened. All right. So once again, this is pointing out the Jews are black. And let's go to our next quote. It says, this is from Spanish Benedict Monk, where he says, for 1,000 times they are with white women, their children are born with the dark skin of their parents. Okay. And then if we go over to John Mackey, this is a good one. And that, the previous one was from 1606. This one's from 1733. And it reads, Earl of Nottingham, Secretary of State, is eldest son to Mr. Fitch, Lord Chancellor in the reign of King Charles II. This gentleman never made any considerable figure till the Revolution, when he zealously opposed King William's coming to the throne, yet was made Secretary of State by the Prince. He had also the exterior air of business, an application enough to make himself capable. In his habit and manners, very formal, a tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or a Jew about 50 years old. You got it? A tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or a Jew about 50 years old. Okay, so on to Francis Maximilian. So Francis Maximilian also has an interesting quote here where he says, "'Tis also a vulgar error," he wrote, "that the Jews are all black." So you can see that back in the day, most people were thinking that the Jews were all black, but Maximilian is saying, no, they're not all black. But let's listen. He says, "'Tis vulgar error also," he wrote, "that the Jews are all black." He says, "For this is only true of the Portuguese," what we read before, right? "Of the Portuguese who marrying always among one another." So they married among themselves, beget children like themselves. So in other words, Francis is saying that they're not mixing, so they're retaining their color. And it says, "And consequently the swarthiness," which means blackness, or the blackness of their complexion, "is entailed upon their whole race, even in the northern region." So that's a very good quote. And let's go to our next one, where it says, "It is evident to me that the Jews bear the sign of their fatherland, the Orient. Throughout the world, their short, black, curly hair, their brown skin, their rapid speech, their brisk and precipitous actions also come from this source. I believe that the Jews have more gall than other people." And okay, so their brown skin. So you got that in that second one. And then I'm going to jump down to the bottom of the next one here, where it says, "There is no category of supposed human beings which come closer to the orangutan than does a Polish Jew, covered from foot to head in filth, dirt, and rags, covered in a type of black sack. Their necks expose the color of a black. Their faces covered up to the eyes, which with a beard, which would have given the high priest in the temple chills. The hair turned and knotted." So this reference is a good reference that speaks to the hair texture of the Jews, because maybe up to this point you may be conceding that at the very least these Jews were black, but maybe in the back of your mind you're saying, well, that doesn't mean that they had black hair, right? That didn't mean that they were totally Negro. But as we see here, it says the hair turned and knotted. And if you know anything about the hair of the so-called African American, you'll know that the hair turns and it knots. All right, so let's wrap this first video up here with a reference from Robert Knox, and this is a good one. So it's Robert Knox, and that's the book here. This book was written in 1850. And so this first one comes from page 133. This first reference comes from 133. And it says, I'm going to start at the top. It says, "As I attentively surveyed the Jewish population on the streets of London." So he's getting ready to tell you about the Jews in London. He says, "I fancied I could perceive three different cast of features." He says, "The first, Jewish, par excellence, and never to be mistaken. The second, such as a Rembrandt drew, and a third, possibly darker, of the other races intermingled." So he's saying that there's three different casts of features. The first, Jewish, right? So remember, the first, Jewish. I'm reiterating that for a point. The first, Jewish. It says, "It seems to me, indeed, that almost every race shows, as it were, three forms of race which run into each other, connecting them possibly with others, so that this is not peculiar to the Jewish race." It says, "Of the first form," which is the Jewish form, it says, "Of the first form, I need say little to you, begging you merely to recollect, to remember," and he's going to describe them. He says, "that the contour is convex, the eyes long and fine, the angles running towards the temples, the brow and the nose apt to form a single convex line, the nose comparatively narrow at the base, the eyes consequently approaching each other." He says, "Lips," this is where you need to tune in, "the lips very full." So who has full lips today? "Lips very full, mouth projecting, chin small." He says, "and the whole physiognomy," he said, in other words, the way they look, "when swarthy or when black, as it often is, has an African look." Now I need to read that again. It says, "and the whole physiognomy," the way they look, "when swarthy or when black," he says, as it often is. So they're often black, right? It says has an African look. Okay, so that's an interesting quote by Robert Knox. He basically says that these Jews look African. Okay, so these Jews look African, or basically these Jews look Negro, like Negroes. All right, and this is the last reference. I thought this would be an interesting one to throw in there, where it talks about race. It says the dark races of men, and this comes from page 153. And we're going to close on this one, and it says, but who are the dark races of ancient and modern times? It would not be easy to answer this question. Let me just start it over. It says, but who are the dark races of ancient and modern times? It would not be easy to answer this question. It says, were the Copts or the Egyptians a dark race? Are the Jews a dark race? The Gypsies, the Chinese, etc.? Dark they are. Dark they are, to a certain extent. So are all the Mongol tribes, the American Indians. If you know, seeing pictures of the American Indians, they were dark. I mean, they were brown, dark brown. It says, and the Eskimo. It says, the inhabitants of nearly all Africa. So we know all Africa is dark too, right? It says, the east of Australia. So I thought this would be interesting to throw in, where he talks about the races of men of the ancient and modern times in general. It says, but who are the dark races of ancient and modern times? It would not be easy to answer this question. It says, were the Copts or the Egyptians a dark race? Yeah. It says, are the Jews a dark race? Yeah. The Gypsies? Yeah. The Chinese? Yeah. And it says, then he answers the question. He says, dark they are, to a certain extent. And then he goes on and then, mentions the American Indians and the Eskimos and Africa and stuff like that. So anyway, but that's a good reference to close this out with. So hopefully, up to now, you've gotten a lot of information about and a good understanding about the black Jews, the Jews being black, and that now you can see that it's not just like one or two references, right, that point out the fact that the Jews were black or dark. But there's several references, and like I said, at the end of this series, we're gonna hit 50. That's our goal. I've counted, so I know I have at least 50. I got more than 50 actually, but we're gonna hit 50 in this one, and I may circle back on this one and try to get it up to 100 just to prove a point, because I think at this point we're kind of tired of the back and forth with folks saying that Jews look this way or they look that way, and I think that misunderstanding really boils down to reading. Not a lot of us are taking the time to read books from the ancient times, from books that were from the 1800s or older. I think they're grabbing hold of these books that are from the 1900s or newer, which are giving a total spin of history, different spin of history than the one that was given many years before. All right, so let's go ahead and end this one. Stay tuned. I hope to follow the follow-up video, part 2, shortly thereafter. And thanks again for watching. If you have time, go ahead and click on subscribe so you can get a notification on the next video. And have a great day, and shalom.
Can't breathe. Can't breathe. Oppression pressing on my neck. My thinking, breathing, hair's just been cut off. I'm dying in this American wreck. In the valley of the dry bones, no flesh, just bones. We were once the rulers, but now we sing our enemy's song. Oh, say, can you see? Blinding lies, my people are not free. This is captivity. We wanted to be like them, we integrated with them, worship their gods and their idols like them. Jacob troubles, pressure, more pressure on the neck. I can't breathe. No oxygen to the brain drives a man insane. The heathen rage, the lions that once ruled the nations roar and roam in a cage. Programmed to kill the offspring with injections, wiping out the bloodline with demon infections. Trying to corrupt the most high olive tree, so that the natural branches will not return to thee. Choke them out, pressure, choke them out. Natural seed, replace them with GMO seeds. Oh no, it will never please the most high's knees. The chains become tighter around our neck, controlling dog leash. The skin is raw to the bone. Can't move, can't see, the whole body hurts. I can't breathe, can't breathe. Simulation, I can't breathe. Incarceration, I can't breathe. Reparation, I can't breathe. Losing my sanity, we can't breathe. Simulation, I can't breathe. Incarceration, I can't breathe. Reparation, I can't breathe. Losing our sanity, we can't breathe. Get off my neck. Year 1600, chains on my people's neck. 1776, no freedom, red, white, and blue around my people's neck. 1863, Emancipation Proclamation, dog leash around my people's neck. 1900, Jim Crow around our neck. 2000, increased poverty, no upward mobility, incarceration around our necks. 2020, heavy chains are on our necks. Death is on our necks. We can't breathe, we can't breathe. The enemy are bashed deep into our bloodline. We die, we cry to the Most High. You promised that you would save us from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us. Murdered black men and women, blood cries out from the dust. Please forgive us, we want a new birth. Most High, please wrap our bones with skin. Breathe life into us again that we may live. Ezekiel, prophesy to these bones. Life, hope, deliverance. Simulation, I can't breathe. Incarceration, I can't breathe. Reparation, I can't breathe. Losing our sanity, we can't breathe. Simulation, I can't breathe. Incarceration, I can't breathe. Reparation, I can't breathe. Losing our sanities, America.